Hello and welcome. Today I am going to be planning and planting a Three Sisters garden, and I just wanted to film it and document my experience learning about it, planning the garden, and then planting the garden for anyone who may be interested. So the Three Sisters planting method, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a centuries-old Native American agricultural technique. And it's called the Three Sisters because it's comprised of three main crops, or three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. These crops were really the backbone of many indigenous food systems and cultures for quite a number of reasons. The three of them together comprise a very healthy, nutritious diet. From the corn, you get carbohydrates. From the beans, you get protein, and then from the squash, you get other vitamins and minerals. So the three of them together really form a solid backbone of a nutritious diet. Another reason is that all three of these plants can be dried or stored in the winter, so you can harvest them in the fall and then store them for the winter and eat them year-round. And then from a gardening or farming perspective, these three crops complement each other beautifully. Corn is notorious for devouring nutrients from soil and just really needing a lot in order to produce a crop. And the bean is actually able to add nutrients back to the soil via nitrogen fixation, which I talked about in my last garden video if you're interested in knowing the details. But basically, beans are able to make up for the nutritional deficit that corn is taking from the soil as it grows. And then the squash acts as a ground cover, both to shade the soil so that water is retained more easily in the soil, and also to crowd out anything that might be growing and keep weeds at bay. It's no surprise then that the Three Sisters planting method has become really popular with the permaculture community. And there are many different variations of the planting method that different tribes used, and that vary depending on like your environment, your space considerations, your water level, that kind of thing. So I thought I would just document my planning and planting process. And then later in the year when I go to harvest, I will share my experience for how it went and, if there's any issues or improvements that I want to make. Okay, so with all that being said, let's get started. I started out planning my Three Sisters garden by researching different planting layouts. So I am going to be planting my Three Sisters garden in a raised bed. So my primary constraint really is the space. This is a diagram that I made of my raised bed. It's 9.5 by 4.5. This over here is this giant rosemary bush that I have no interest in removing. It's gorgeous, but it does take up quite a huge amount of space. So really I'm working with like about 6 by 4.5-ish. I kind of adapted from a couple different methods that I saw. In general, it basically just seems like, you can kind of adjust it to fit what you need for your space. So I have 4 areas for the corn to go, and in each area I'm going to have like 3 to 4 corn growing in that one area, and that allows them to grow strong and tall together. Then I'm going to surround that by beans around the corn, and the beans will basically grow up the corn, so the corn provides essentially a trellis for the beans to grow onto. And then between the corn and bean mounds you plant squash. I think my squash is probably going to be a little bit dense, but I have a lot of different varieties of squash that I want to grow. So I'm being ambitious, and I'm just telling myself that if it's a problem, I will thin it later. But to be honest, I probably won't thin it later. I know myself, but whatever. I'm going to say that now, and that will allow me to plant all my varieties of squash. You'll also notice in the back, I have this row, and I am planning to plant sunflowers as well at the back of the bed. Sunflowers are sometimes called the fourth sister, and the reason for this is oftentimes birds will be interested in eating the corn, and so if you have sunflowers, the birds will instead go for the sunflower seeds. It also attracts pollinators in general, and it just provides a nice backdrop. That's mostly the reason that I'm planting it, because I like sunflowers. Yeah, so this is my plan. And then basically what I'm going to do is just measure this out and start planting in the beds. So then as far as the different kinds of plants go, so my plan is to plant only sweet corn. This is because corn cross-pollinates very easily, and when it cross-pollinates with other varieties of corn, it often does not create a good corn on the cob at the end. So I will be only planting sweet corn, and I have a couple here. You can see they're getting kind of crusty because it's been pretty hot here, and these guys are ready to go in the ground. For the beans, I will be planting scarlet runner beans. They're so gorgeous. I know that you're supposed to direct sow the beans, but I'm going to start these in trays because we got varmints out here, and I'm not trying to have all my beans eaten by varmints before my Three Sisters garden comes in. And then for squash, I have many, many varieties, hence the reason why I wanted to grow so many squash. All these seeds are from the Sustainable Seed Company. I've got some organic Lakota squash. I've got a butternut squash, and then an acorn squash, and a spaghetti squash. So 4 different seeds here that I plan to start today. And then I also have these guys, which are pumpkin seeds that I saved from last year, as well as a variety of pumpkin. I think it was like a winter luxury pumpkin, something like that, like an orange variety pumpkin. These guys are ready to go in the ground. So yeah, I will be planting these today, starting these and planting them later, and also planting the corn today. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's get started. So everything is done for now. So the corn and the sunflowers are all completely planted. And then 2 of the pumpkins I planted, and then I started seeds for the other varieties of squash that I want to grow. And then I also started the beans, and I did all of that in trays just because I'm concerned about pests getting my seeds. They really like beans. So I'm really just trying to make sure that I can get them to sprout and grow a little bit more before I plant them in the ground, which I think is also not a bad idea because the corn really needs like a little bit of time to grow up tall enough that the bean can grow onto it without inhibiting its growth. Hopefully the corn will get a chance to kind of grow up and do its thing before I put in the beans and the rest of the squash. I guess just sort of to conclude the video, kind of just talking through my learning more holistically. So this is only my 2nd year gardening, and I would say that so far my approach has been more like experimental than anything else. Like I've kind of just like tried stuff and see what's works, see what I like, see what I actually use, that kind of thing. And now that I have that 1st year behind me and I'm more attuned to the cycles of, this plot of land that I'm on, I'm trying to get more into thinking about it as like a whole systems design basically, and just trying to learn more really about like permaculture and that kind of thing. Permaculture is basically just permanent agriculture. It's just thinking about agriculture as being more in tune to the cycles of nature and a part of the nature that it's in, rather than being something that is, put in monoculture, harvest, dead field. Like it's more about thinking of the land that you're growing food on holistically and trying to make things work in a cycle with each other. Hence why the Three Sisters is so popular amongst permaculture people, because it's this ancient indigenous way of planting that has existed in so many different tribes over so many different ecosystems, from like the northeast to the southwest. Permaculture is a relatively new term. I think it kind of came about in the 70s, but it's not really a new system in the sense that the way that indigenous people all around the world farmed, implemented a lot of what we would consider to be permaculture principles now. I've been going through Heather Jo Flores' free permaculture course, which I highly recommend. I'll link it down below. I really, really enjoy it, and it's all free. One of the lessons in that was talking about permaculture ethics. Permaculture has 3 main ethics that are sort of the guiding philosophies. The first ethic is care for the earth. The second ethic is care for the people. Okay, so pretty explanatory. And then the third ethic is kind of referred to as the third ethic. From what I've read, it seems like there's a lot of different interpretations of the third ethic and what it really means. In Bill Mollison's Permaculture Designer's Manual, which is sort of like the Bible guidebook for modern permaculture, he says the third ethic is limits to population and consumption, which a lot of people aren't into. Care for the earth, care for the people, limits to population and consumption. Like, I understand what it means, but I think the way that it's phrased is leaving something to be lacked. And so there's many other people who've kind of thrown out things. I think the third ethic can sort of be summarized by like nothing in excess. That's maybe one way of thinking about it. I was reading through different things that people had come up with in the permaculture community for the third ethic. And I think that the interpretation of the third ethic that I prefer is the 7 generations principle. And I think that the 7 generations principle is originally from the Haudenosaunee people or the Iroquois nation. And I think also the African permaculture school has taught it, a different version that's quite similar. But the idea of the 7 generations principle, as it was implemented in, past indigenous societies, was that the decisions that we make now should be with consideration for those that will live 7 generations in the future. So that's not just for environmental things, although you can obviously see why that has permeated the environmental community, hence companies like 7th Generation calling themselves 7th Generation. It's supposed to be a way of thinking about yourself and your place in time. And when I was reading about this, I was like, is this only Haudenosaunee? Because I swear to God, I had been told about 7 generations before. And for context, my grandfather is Oglala Lakota, and I remember him talking about 7 generations, but it was not in the context of this sort of like environmental principle. It was like this like Lakota prophecy. And basically the story goes, a Lakota medicine man had a vision and foretold a prophecy that famine, war, and sickness would befall the Lakota people. And it would only be after 7 generations that this would be able to be rectified and right relationship with the earth would be able to be established again. And my grandfather would always say, like, the grandchildren, they're the 7th generation, like the 7th generation is now, which makes sense, like chronologically speaking. And I remember everyone kind of be like, okay, whatever. When I think about the 7 generations principle, I don't just think about it in terms of someday. Oh, hi. Hello. I'm filming a video. I don't even know if you can see her. Okay. Are you gonna sit next to me? Yeah, okay. Anyway, I bring up this whole long-winded personal anecdote because when I think about the 7 generations principle, is not only, myself and 7 generations after me, but also myself and 7 generations prior, and how much had to be endured and sacrificed, and how much they believed in my existence in order to survive and carry on. And I think that this can be applied not only to, indigenous people or people that come from backgrounds where their ancestors did have a lot of struggle. I think thinking about yourself in the context of your ancestors and as yourself as a future ancestor is very humbling, and it's also very beautiful. And I think it gives a lot of purpose to the work that you do, not only in the garden, but also just in your life in general. So yeah, all of that long-winded philosophical discussion on permaculture ethics, it's just something I've been thinking about, when I'm out there in the garden, I'm just musing about these things. So I thought I would share. I still don't really know what this channel is exactly going to be. I'm kind of just like figuring it out as I go. But if you have made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. I very much appreciate it. And I would love to know what you think if you have any thoughts on any of this. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye!